A river doesn't begin in one single place. There isn't one drop, one point, one moment. Its birth is a process that takes years. Quiet years, hidden in snow, rock, and cloud. Everything starts high up in the mountains, where the air is so thin that breathing feels like work, and water stays frozen most of the year. Every river has its source, but before it appears, it must pass through stages. It begins as precipitation, snow, ice, rain. The water that falls from the sky settles on ridges and slopes. In cold regions, it gathers as snow that doesn't melt for months. Each new layer presses down on the one beneath it, compacting into ice. This is how a glacier is born, an immense body of frozen water that slowly moves under its own weight. A glacier isn't dead. It's a slow living river of ice, sliding down the mountainside, grinding rock, carving valleys, leaving traces of entire ages behind. When its lower layers meet warmer air, the ice begins to melt. Water seeps through cracks, collecting in hidden channels beneath the surface, until finally it breaks free, as a stream. In that moment, somewhere beneath the glacier's tongue, a river is born. These are births no one ever witnesses. Often the source remains hidden, in a cave, beneath a stone, in the shadow of a cliff. Water can flow from the same spot for centuries before anyone discovers it. Some rivers, like the Ganges or the Nile, are born from glaciers. Others, like the Amazon, form from days of tropical rainfall drenching mountain ranges. But the principle is always the same. A river is the Earth's way of letting go of excess water. Water flows because gravity gives it no choice. Every drop seeks the lowest path it can find. In the mountains, the stream is narrow, violent, and foaming. It crashes against rocks, cuts sharp corners, and drills through cracks. This is how mountain torrents are made. Cold, fierce, unpredictable. Their power doesn't come from volume, but from slope. With every meter of descent, the water gains speed, and that kinetic energy can tear rock apart. Over time, one stream meets another. Water from many sources gathers in one place, forming a stronger current. That's the moment when a true river begins. There's no single point where it starts, just as there's no single moment when a child becomes an adult. But from then on, the river has its own identity, its own channel, direction, rhythm. Every river reflects its source. Those born from glaciers are cold and filled with mineral silt, which gives them a milky turquoise color. Those born from rain are clearer, more transparent. Water carries minerals from the rocks it's touched, and life from the places it's passed through. In that way, every river becomes a sum of all the lands it has met. To a geologist, a river's birth is part of the hydrological cycle. To a biologist, it's the beginning of an ecosystem. But to the planet, it's something greater, a way of breathing. The water that falls from the sky must return to the ocean. It must close the loop. The river is that path, the vein through which the planet drains the excess of life back to where it came from. When a river leaves the mountains, it begins to change. It loses its wildness but gains wisdom. Where it once was pure force, it becomes a sculptor. It no longer rushes blindly downward. Now it chooses its way. It spreads, bends, turns back, forming meanders. This is its language. A river never flows straight because the earth itself is not straight. Every curve is a response to resistance. Every change in direction, an answer to what it meets along the way. Water remembers motion. When it meets an obstacle, it moves around it, but never forgets it. The whirlpool that forms behind a rock can last for years, slowly grinding its edges away. That's how a river carves its bed, not through violence but through patience. Water doesn't strike once, it touches the same place 1,000,000 times, and every touch leaves a mark. That's how valleys are made, long, soft scars on the planet's skin. Where rivers have flowed for thousands of years, the land becomes their reflection. The valley floor is flat, fertile, full of sediment. The river brings down minerals, sand, and silt from the mountains, everything it has gathered along the way. When the current slows, those particles settle. Because of them, the soil along the river becomes the richest on earth. Every field, every forest that grows in a valley owes its life to the water that once destroyed rock. A river doesn't only carve, It builds. When it floods, it creates new paths and abandons old ones. Over time, oxbow lakes form. Former bends cut off from the main flow, turning into sanctuaries of life. There, swamps are born, wetlands spread, and new worlds appear for fish, birds, and plants. Water never stands still, but it always leaves something behind. From a geological perspective, a river is an instrument of time. The pace at which it changes the landscape seems impossibly slow, yet over millions of years it's a mighty force. It cuts into continents, splits plateaus, and creates canyons. The Grand Canyon itself was carved this way. 5 million years of a single river slicing through rock, day after day, drop by drop, revealing the planet's history written in layers of stone. On the plains, the river calms. Its current slows, spreading wider. This is the stage of maturity. The river knows its destination, though it hasn't yet reached it. It begins to meander, drawing great loops across the land, as if playing with space. Each bend is a dialogue between strength and patience. Where water hits the outer bank, erosion eats the soil away. On the inner side, where the current slows, it deposits what it once took. In this way, the river sculpts its own curves, moves them, and eventually changes its entire course. From a satellite, it looks like a vein pulsing within the body of the planet. Flowing, winding, breathing. Rivers aren't lines on a map. They are living systems that move. In the span of a single millennium, a river can shift its bed by miles. For humans, that's a disaster. For nature, it's simply rhythm. Along its journey, a river meets many obstacles, boulders, cliffs, other rivers. Sometimes it merges with tributaries, taking in their waters and their stories. Every tributary is like a new memory, a new fragment of life. That's why the river is always changing. It's no longer the same stream that flowed from the mountains. It has a different composition, a different color, a different temperament. As time passes, the river grows slower, heavier. It carries tons of material, sand, silt, clay. And at the end of its journey, all of it settles in one place. Where the water loses its strength, a delta is born, the river's final creation. There, the river stops being itself and becomes the sea. But before that moment comes, before its waters reach the ocean, the river has already built everything we see: valleys, plains, forests, cities. It decides where the soil will be fertile and where it will be dry. It chooses where people can live. The civilizations that rose along its banks, Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, China, were all born from the same truth. Wherever water flows, life begins. A river isn't just water moving forward. It's a living organism. Within its current, in the mud, among stones, beneath the surface, there's constant motion, constant life. For most creatures, there's no border between air and water, between the riverbed and the flow. The river is an entire world, dynamic, shifting, unpredictable. Every stretch of a river is its own ecosystem. In its upper reaches, where the current is fast and cold, life must be strong. Here live the creatures that can cling to the bottom. Mayfly larvae, caddisflies, amphipods. Their bodies are built to survive the torrent. Fish like trout and grayling hide behind rocks, saving their energy. In these clear, oxygen-rich waters, everything is alert, in motion, on edge. It's a world built on survival. Farther downstream, the river begins to slow, and life changes with it. The water grows warmer, cloudier, lower in oxygen. Aquatic plants take root: grasses, pondweeds, lilies. The bottom turns to mud, home to countless invertebrates. In calmer waters, fish appear that no longer have to fight the current. Carp, bream, catfish. This is no longer a wild torrent, but a river full of slow, steady life. A river sustains itself. Everything within it is part of a cycle. A leaf that falls from a tree becomes food for bacteria. Those bacteria are eaten by microscopic organisms, which are eaten by insect larvae, fish, and birds. Every movement, every death, every decay is a transformation that keeps the river alive. The water is constantly cleansing itself, breaking down waste, dispersing toxins, delivering oxygen. It's a system that worked perfectly for millions of years, until humans began to break it. But a river is also a boundary between worlds. Along its banks gather species that can live nowhere else. Water birds, amphibians, mammals. River valleys hold the planet's richest biodiversity. A few feet are enough to step from forest to aquatic cosmos. Every layer of water is another world. The surface bright and full of motion. The depths dark, still and cool as night. In its lower reaches, where the river widens and slows, wetlands and floodplains emerge. These are nature's laboratories of life. Algae thrive here, producing oxygen. Mosquito larvae feed birds, fish, and frogs. It's a place where death and birth happen at the same time, where water decays and creates all at once. Scientists say a river is one of the most complex ecosystems on Earth because it never stands in balance. Every change in weather, temperature, rainfall, or tide affects it instantly. A storm in the mountains can raise the water level hundreds of miles away. It's like a body that feels everything, even when only one finger is wounded. A river is also a pathway of migration, a road to life. For fish, it's the route home. Salmon, trout, eels, all make journeys that seem impossible. They return to the places where they were born, swimming upstream for hundreds of miles, guided by something humans still don't fully understand. Chemical memory, instinct, the pull of the source. When these paths disappear, cut off by dams, pollution, or heat, the river stops breathing. Because life within it is not only what you see, it's also what moves, connects, repeats. In every river, even the smallest, there is something like a pulse. It's not just the speed of the current, but the rhythm of the whole system. The rise and fall of water, the play of light, the shifts in temperature, all of it works like a heartbeat. When that rhythm falters, the river's life begins to tremble. A river can survive pollution, it can cut through stone. But it cannot survive silence. A river without movement dies. Humanity has always followed the water. Before we built shelters, before we plowed the earth, before we invented the word civilization, we sought the river. Because where water flows, life can exist. The first cities didn't rise by accident along its banks. Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and the Euphrates. Egypt along the Nile, India by the Ganges, China on the Yellow River. 4 cradles of the world, 4 paths of water. It wasn't humans who created rivers. It was rivers that created humans. In the river valleys, the soil was soft, rich in minerals and life. Each year, the water overflowed, leaving behind fertile silt. People understood it was a gift and learned to use it. They built canals to irrigate their fields. They built dams to hold back the flow. The first civilizations were hydraulic ones, civilizations of control over water. But each of them knew that what the river gives, it can also take away. The Nile was a blessing, until it flooded. The Tigris and Euphrates brought harvests, but could destroy a city overnight. A river is unpredictable. It changes course, rises, dries, spreads. For humans, who crave stability, that was always a problem. And so began the struggle for control. As technology advanced, humans believed they could master the river. Huge dams, reservoirs, and flood barriers were built. Channels were dug, meanders straightened, banks lined with concrete to keep the river in place. It stopped being wild, became part of an energy grid, a transport route, an industrial system. Water was tamed, or so we thought, but in truth, a river always takes back its freedom. All it takes is a flood, a single season of heavy rain, to remind us who's really in charge. No city, no wall, no dam can hold it forever. Water always finds a way. It always returns. We can redirect it, slow it, block it, but never stop it. Over time, the river began to suffer. Polluted by waste, cut off from its tributaries and wetlands, it started to fall silent. In places once full of fish, only brown water remained. In many countries, rivers became technical channels, lines on maps, not living systems, and yet they still breathe. When people step away, the river comes back. It can heal itself, if only we give it time. Today, paradoxically, we're learning to listen to rivers again. We've begun to understand that they aren't obstacles but allies. We're restoring wetlands, pulling back concrete banks, leaving space for water to spread without disaster. It's a return to ancient wisdom, the understanding that humanity is not the river's owner, but its guest. The great rivers of the world still tell our story. The Nile still floods, the Ganges still feeds millions, the Amazon still breathes for half the planet. Yet they too are changing. They are shrinking, drying, poisoned by metals, oil, and plastic. The river that once gave birth to life has become a mirror, reflecting what humanity has done to the world. And yet, the river never truly ends. It can dry up, disappear underground, change its course, but it will return. It always returns, because it is part of a cycle that cannot be broken. Water evaporates from the ocean, becomes a cloud, falls upon the mountains, and flows again. The river is the movement of the planet, and though humans build dams of concrete, the river builds dams of time. In every drop that slides down a rock, there is more than physics. There is memory. The river remembers the mountains it came from, the rains that fed it, the creatures that lived within it, the cities it passed through. And when it reaches the sea, it does not vanish. It simply joins something greater. Humans build borders. Rivers erase them. Humans draw maps. Rivers rewrite them. And maybe that's why, after all these centuries of dominance, we still look at rivers with the same feeling, a mix of awe and fear. Deep down, we know the river is older, wiser, and more patient than we are. Every great civilization begins with a river. It's no coincidence that the first cities on Earth rose not where the land was dry, but where water paused on its way. The Nile, the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Indus, the Huanghe, these aren't just names. They are cradles of entire worlds. Water gave life, and the river was its heart. In ancient Egypt, the Nile wasn't just a source of water, it was a god. Each year it flooded, covering the valley and leaving behind a fertile layer of silt. From that silt came grain, fields, bread, and empire. The rhythm of its floods was the rhythm of life. There was no calendar that didn't follow it. But even the Nile had its limits. When the floods were too small, famine began. When too great, they destroyed the crops. Egyptian civilization lasted for millennia, only because it knew how to listen to the water, never to conquer it. In Mesopotamia, it was different. The land between the Tigris and Euphrates. There, humanity first tried to master the river. Canals, dams, irrigation systems were built. The desert was turned into a garden, but the price was high. The water that gave life began to bring salt. In the heat of Mesopotamia, irrigated fields lost moisture, and the soil grew more saline. The land died slowly. Grain stopped growing, cities emptied, not because of war, but because of rivers forced to flow where they did not want to go. The Indus Valley, Harappa, and Mohenjo-Daro also vanished into silence. For centuries, the river had sustained that civilization. But the earth shifted. Earthquakes and climate changes moved the Indus's main channel hundreds of miles away. The river that once fed the cities suddenly abandoned them. Streets, wells, canals, everything humans built remained. But the water was gone. And without water, there is nothing. The same fate befell the Maya. Their cities rose in the jungle, far from great rivers, dependent on seasonal rains and underground streams in caves. Cenotes. When the climate changed, the rains stopped. The water in the wells dropped by meters. The earth cracked. A drought lasting only a few decades was enough for cities to empty, temples to fall silent, and people to leave in search of water. A river has always marked the line between life and death. Where it flows, everything grows. Where it vanishes, everything retreats. It wasn't iron or fire that destroyed civilizations, but their forgetting that water was never theirs to own. Humans can dig canals and build dams, but they cannot create a new source. Modern times have their ghost rivers too. The Aral Sea, once the fourth largest lake in the world, has nearly disappeared, drained by humans who diverted its feeding rivers to irrigate cotton fields. The water left, the wind carried salt, the earth turned to desert, and with it vanished fishing towns and entire ecosystems. Half a century was enough to erase a sea that had existed for thousands of years. Every dried-up river leaves behind more than emptiness. It leaves a warning. Because where the water ends, civilization ends. Modern humans forget that they are not the masters of rivers, but their guests. We can dam them, redirect them, trap them in concrete banks, but they will find a way. And if they don't, the world will pay. A river is the pulse of the planet. When it stops flowing, the earth loses its heartbeat. Cities fade like campfires after rain. Fields turn to ash. People leave, leaving only footprints in the cracked mud. The story of humanity could be written as the course of a river, beginning in the mountains, flourishing on the plains, dissolving in the delta. Because when the river disappears, everything we've built becomes dust. For thousands of years, the river was our teacher, our guide, our sacred companion. It gave us water, fish, fertile soil. But at some point, humans stopped listening and started talking to the river instead. That was the moment we stopped observing and began to measure, weigh, and plan. We realized that within its flow lay more than life. It held energy. Water falling from heights is power, and power can be harnessed. That's how hydroenergy was born, one of humanity's oldest forms of taming nature. At first, it was simple river mills grinding grain or sawing wood. The water wheel, turned by the current, was the first machine humans built, powered purely by nature. The river became both ally and worker, invisible, tireless, silent. Then came the age of dams. Humanity learned to stop a river. We built walls so massive they changed entire landscapes, reservoirs, artificial lakes, power stations, all designed to capture the river's strength and turn it into electricity. In the 20th century, hydroelectric dams powered cities, factories, and nations. The dams of the Nile, the Colorado, the Amazon, the Mekong, the Yangtze, each stands as a monument to human ambition. The greatest of them, the Three Gorges in China, is so immense it altered the Earth's rotation, literally. Scientists calculated that the mass of its water reservoir slightly slowed the planet's spin, one of the few times in history when a human structure affected the rhythm of the world itself. But such power has a price. A river that's been stopped ceases to be itself. The halted current loses its breath. Sediments sink to the bottom. Fish can no longer migrate. An ecosystem that existed for millennia suddenly freezes, sometimes literally, as if someone had stopped its pulse. Massive dams can destroy a river built over eons, fertile valleys, wetlands, natural flood rhythms. The water that once carried life begins to rot in place. However, man did not stop trying. Today, rivers not only provide energy in power plants, they are also part of modern systems of cooling, transport, and purification. Water still drives our world, only in a different way. Quietly, hidden in pipes, channels, turbines. In cities, it no longer flows in riverbeds, but through steel arteries. It is still alive, but it no longer has a voice. In a sense, man has reversed the roles. It is no longer the river that feeds his world. It is he who decides where and how it should flow. But the river remembers. Every dam has its limit, every reservoir its banks, every concrete cracks. The river knows how to reclaim itself. Sometimes slowly, seeping through pores, sometimes suddenly, like when a dam bursts and the water returns, with full force, as if to remind us who the world truly belongs to. For man can tame the river, but he can never stop it. He can imprison it, but not kill it. The river is movement, and movement is life. And when man tries to stop that movement, he really stops himself. Never before in the history of the world have rivers disappeared as quickly as they do today. Not because the planet has changed, but because man has. In the past, a river could die because of climate, tectonic shifts, or the movement of waters. Today, it dies of exhaustion. Not because the rain has stopped, but because balance has. Modern rivers do not dry up on their own. Man draws from them more than nature can give back. Every field, every power plant, every city draws life from them like from a vein. The river has become a resource, not a being within the ecosystem. Every kilometer of water has already been divided among industry, agriculture, and energy. And a river that has nothing left to give simply disappears. Look at the Indus. Millions of people live by its waters. Yet today, its course is torn between nations that divide every drop of it like gold. The glaciers of the Himalayas, its source, are melting faster than ever. In summer, the river is mighty, but in winter, it turns into a band of dry channels. In some years, the Indus no longer reaches the sea. Or the Nile, the river that once gave life to all of Egypt, now closed by dozens of dams. Every country it flows through wants control over it. Water has become a weapon. Every cubic meter is a potential conflict. The Mekong in Southeast Asia, one of the most fertile rivers in the world, is drying up because dozens of dams have been built along its upper course. The current that once fed hundreds of millions of people has slowed, and the fish no longer migrate. The Mekong Delta, where the river meets the ocean, shrinks each year as if the sea were devouring its body. And in Europe, rivers that once seemed immortal, the Danube, the Rhine, the Loire, have in recent years turned into dry beds. Record heat waves have made water levels drop so low that hunger stones began to emerge from the riverbeds. Rocks once carved with the words, "If you see this, weep." It is an old sign, etched by our ancestors in times of famine, when the river vanished and the land turned to dust. In North America, the Colorado River no longer reaches the ocean. It is stopped by dams, canals, and systems that irrigate the deserts of Nevada and California. From its water, cities were born: Las Vegas, Phoenix, Los Angeles. But the sea into which it once flowed saw its current for the last time decades ago. Modern rivers die in silence. They do not erupt, they do not scream, they simply shrink. First the fish die, then the greenery disappears, and finally the water stops flowing. On maps the name remains, but in the landscape, only a trace. Climate change accelerates this process. The ice in the mountains melts faster, but there is less and less snow. Rainfall is more violent, but shorter, and the soil has no time to absorb the water. The river that for thousands of years grew from rain and ice now receives everything at once, flood and drought in the same year. It cannot breathe in such a rhythm. And yet, nature is not the greatest enemy of rivers. It is us, in our desire for control. We want the water to flow where we need it, not where it should. We build canals, straighten riverbeds, cut off tributaries. The water loses its instinct. The river that was once free now flows in concrete, between banks like in a cage. But every river has a memory. A few years of rain, a few cracks in a dam, and the water reminds us of its power. It returns to the places it was driven from. It takes back what man built in its path, because the river knows no mercy, only direction. Once man feared the water. Today, he underestimates it, and that is a mistake that costs him more and more. Because a river that dries up is not just a lack of water. It is the end of the system that keeps the entire planet alive. Ecosystems, climate, agriculture, forests, cities. It is as if the Earth's heart were slowly draining away. And perhaps that is why, when we look today at the dry beds of former rivers, we should not think they are dead. They are simply waiting. Waiting for man to remember that one cannot live against the water. A river seems eternal. You look at it and feel as if it has always flowed, before you, before the city, before history. But that is an illusion. A river, like every creation of nature, has its beginning, its growth, and its end. Yes, a river can disappear. Not overnight, but slowly, in silence, as if burning out from within. Because a river is not only water, it is a system of connected vessels, sources, tributaries, rainfall, soil, climate, man. If one of these elements collapses, the whole structure ceases to exist. Most often, a river dies at its source, where its life begins, in mountains, glaciers, rainy zones. It takes only the lack of snow, the melting happening too fast, the temperature rising by a few degrees. The ice disappears, and with it, the heart of the river. At first, it is only a shadow of its former current, a stream that flows shorter each year. Then nothing, only stones where once the water ran. Sometimes the river vanishes from its mouth. The sea that for centuries received its waters begins to retreat or devour the delta. That is what happens today to the Colorado River. Once it flowed into the Gulf of California. Now it ends hundreds of kilometers earlier, in the desert. The river still flows on the map, but not in reality. This is also the fate of the Aral, the lake that died when the rivers Amu Darya and Sir Darya feeding it were cut off. It took only a few decades for one of the world's largest bodies of water to turn into a dry desert of salt. Sometimes a river does not dry up, it simply sinks underground. It changes course. The water seeps into the soil, enters cave systems, and flows elsewhere. That is how underground rivers are born, like those in Slovenia, China, or the Philippines, where the current runs in darkness for dozens of kilometers before suddenly emerging with a new name in a different place. For people, it is a miracle, but from the perspective of geology, it is only a change of route, another stage in the river's life. There are also rivers that die in sand. In deserts like the Sahara or the Gobi, there are so-called ephemeral rivers. They appear only after rain. The water flows for a few days, sometimes hours, and then disappears into the hot sand. So it was with the Wadi Rum River in Jordan. Today, it is a valley where nothing flows anymore, though water once created it. A river can also die by human hand. When dams are built, beds straightened, tributaries cut off, the water loses its direction. If you take away its space, it dies. Thus died part of the Euphrates, the Nile in Sudan, many tributaries of the Amazon. Not spectacularly, they just ceased to exist. But the most terrifying thing is that a river can disappear while still flowing. That is the paradox of modernity. Rivers that have water, but no life. There are no fish, no oxygen, no movement of sediments, no microorganisms. It is a dead current, a technical liquid in a concrete channel. From a satellite, it looks like a river, but it is only a shadow of the former ecosystem. In the history of the Earth, many rivers have already disappeared. Some because of climate change, others because of tectonics. But there is always a trace left behind. A valley, a bed, the shape of the land. A river never disappears completely. Its spirit remains in the landscape, in the lines of rocks, in the bends, in the fertile soil, in the memory of plants that still grow along its former course. For even when a river dies, it leaves behind a trace of life. The earth remembers its flow, as it remembers the touch of ice or fire. A river is not only water, it is a process, a movement that continues even when it is gone. So can a river truly disappear? Yes, but if it does, the world you knew will no longer be the same, because the river is not part of the landscape. It is the landscape, it's only speculation. But try to imagine a world without rivers, without a current, without a source, without that sound that for thousands of years has accompanied every form of life. Could man or any animal survive in such a world? At first glance it seems that yes. We have technology, wells, waterworks, reservoirs. We can desalinate seawater, collect rainwater, create artificial lakes, but that's only an illusion of control. Because a river is not simply water that can be replaced. A river is movement, rhythm, the breath of the planet. It's a system that connects rain, air, earth, life, and time. Every civilization in human history arose by a river. not because it was more convenient, but because there was no other way. The Euphrates and Tigris, the Nile, the Indus, the Huanghe, all were cradles of life because they offered something more than water. They offered order, cyclicality, the certainty that after the flood would come abundance, that after the rainy season would come the sun. The river was man's first calendar and his first god. Without rivers, there would be no agriculture. It was they that brought fertile sediments, creating land on which one could wait for harvests. Without them, there would be no fields, and thus no surpluses, and thus no cities, language, art, or science. Every grain of wheat that has ever sprouted owes itself to the water that flowed down from the mountains. The river taught man patience and rhythm, that nothing lasts forever, but everything can return. Without rivers, there would also be no forests. They distribute water beneath the surface of the earth, sustaining the life of trees, mosses, fungi, everything that breathes more quietly than we do. Where the river flows, the air is cooler and the soil heavier with life. When the river dries up, trees wither, the soil cracks, the rains stop coming. A desert is not born from the lack of sand, but from the lack of water. Animals are even more bound to rivers than man. For them, the current is a map, a road, a guarantee. From migratory birds to elephants, from amphibians to tigers, all follow the water. When the river disappears, first goes the life that lived in it, then the life that depended on it. The chain breaks instantly. A dried-up river is not only the absence of water, it is the end of the entire ecosystem that developed around it. A river is also air. It sounds paradoxical, but that's how it is. Water from rivers evaporates, forming clouds that return as rain. Rain feeds forests, forests produce oxygen. When the river disappears, evaporation ceases. There are no clouds, no rain, no forest. The air becomes dry, the wind hotter, and the earth empty. People today try to replace rivers with technology. Irrigation systems, artificial reservoirs, dams, and pipes. But these are only temporary processes. A river is not a pipe with water. It's a living organism that regulates the planet's balance by itself. In every drop of it, the cycle is written, from clouds to oceans. It is a movement that cannot be programmed. A world without rivers would not die instantly. For a while, man would still drink water from underground layers, grow plants in greenhouses, pump liquid from desalinated seas. But after several decades, rains would begin to vanish, because there would no longer be evaporation from the surface. Forests would turn into dry skeletons and the soil into dust. The climate would break apart into zones of heat and cold, without transitions, without harmony. The earth would stop breathing. Then man would remain where nature still remembered water, in former river valleys, in underground lakes, in places that were once deltas. Life would become fragile, slow, dependent on every drop. Without rivers, the world would return to the original chaos, where there are no borders, no fields, no cities, only wind and the memory that once water flowed down from the mountains. Rivers created man, his language, and his imagination. They taught him humility toward time. That is why, when rivers disappear, something in us disappears too, as if we were losing the memory of our own origin. For a man without a river is a man without roots. He may still walk upon the earth, but he no longer understands it.